Before there were calendars, clocks, or carved stones to mark the passing of days, there was only the endless expanse of silence. The ancients said that time itself was asleep, resting in the womb of eternity, waiting for a spark to call it awake. That spark, they believed, came not from randomness or chance, but from gods who already existed in shadow and brilliance. Black gods, cosmic architects whose essence was older than stars. They were not born within time. They forged time itself. Imagine the first breath of creation not as an explosion of matter, but as a chorus of divine will. The gods of Africa envisioned the cosmos and spoke it into being, weaving rhythm and pattern where only stillness had been. To them, creation was not chaos but harmony, not destruction but order unfolding. The sun, the stars, and the cycles of day and night were not accidents. They were laws laid down by minds so ancient that memory itself bends toward them. In Kemet, this story was told through Ra, the Radiant One, whose journey across the sky was more than light. It was the heartbeat of time. His rising was morning, his descent was evening, his disappearance into the underworld was night. Yet Ra did not exist alone. Behind him stood primordial forces, Nun, the infinite waters of potential, and Atum, who emerged from none to form the first mound of creation. The ancients described Atum as self-created, drawing existence out of nothingness by sheer will. It was not chance but choice, not randomness but magic. But the story did not stop at Kemet. In Nubia, Kush, and the deeper roots of Africa, other names carried the same truth. There were deities who stretched the heavens across the void, who marked the constellations as signs for those yet unborn. They were the keepers of balance, ensuring that the universe unfolded with rhythm. To them, time was not linear but cyclical, forever turning like the sun's path or the moon's phases. These gods shaped the very fabric of the cosmos, embedding laws that even stars obeyed. Gravity, rotation, the pull of tides. The ancients saw these not as mechanical forces but as divine signatures, the invisible hands of gods who painted the sky. To study the heavens was to study their will. The constellations were their hieroglyphs, their stories etched across eternity, messages written not on papyrus but in light. And here lies the most powerful truth. The gods were not separate from their people. The ancients believed that humanity carried the same spark that ignited suns. Every heartbeat echoed Ra's journey. Every breath carried Atum's power. Every step was part of a rhythm as old as the stars. Time was not something that ruled over them. It was something they participated in, something they co-created with their gods. The beginning, then, was not the start of everything but the start of awareness. The moment humans recognized themselves as part of a cosmic story, authored by divine black hands. And as they looked up at the sun and stars, they did not see distant objects. They saw reflections of their gods, living reminders that creation was ongoing and that they were part of it. From this foundation, civilizations would rise, aligning their laws, rituals, and lives with the patterns written in the sky. For the gods who shaped the sun and stars did more than light the heavens. They planted the seeds of order, law, and destiny, which would guide humanity for millennia. The ancients never imagined creation as a single instant, a sudden flash that set the universe spiraling. Instead, they saw it as a steady unfolding chaos, slowly braided into order by divine hands. In their vision, the cosmos was not a battlefield but a garden, and the black gods were its first cultivators, pruning, shaping, arranging until harmony emerged from the void. At the center of this vision was Nun, the boundless sea of potential. It was not yet ocean, not yet sky, but a limitless expanse where every possibility slept. Out of that infinite womb came Atum, who rose upon the first mound of earth and began to distinguish what had been undifferentiated. With his breath, he separated air from water. With his hand, he parted light from darkness. This was the first law. Separation was not destruction but creation. To give boundaries was to give meaning. As Atum shaped the first divisions, other gods emerged. Shu, the god of air, stretched upward, holding the sky aloft. Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, brought fertility to the land. Together they created the space in which life could unfold. From them came Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Geb lay beneath, Nut arched above, and their eternal embrace was pried apart, only so that the world could exist between them. Day and night, birth and death, water and fire, all were balances set in motion by these first acts of order. To the people who honored them, this cosmic ordering was not distant myth but daily rhythm. Every sunrise was Ra's journey. Every rainfall was Tefnut's gift. Every breath was Shu's presence filling the lungs. To live was to be woven into divine structure, to participate in the laws that shaped stars and bodies alike. But order was not a fixed thing. It was fragile, needing constant tending. The gods did not create perfection and then withdraw. They worked continually to maintain harmony. The sun had to rise each day because chaos always threatened to reclaim the world. The moon waxed and waned because balance was never static. Even death was not an end but part of the order. Osiris's resurrection reminding humanity that life and afterlife were a cycle, not a break. Civilizations shaped themselves around these principles. Farmers planted by the rhythms of Nut stars, kings ruled under the mandate of Ma'at's balance, and healers invoked Tefnut's moisture when restoring health. The gods' ordering of the cosmos became the blueprint for society. To live justly was to mirror the heavens. To live unjustly was to invite chaos back into the world. And here lies a profound truth. When the ancients looked at chaos, they did not see evil. They saw raw potential, waiting to be shaped. The gods did not destroy the void, they transformed it. This lesson became the heart of their wisdom, that life is not about escaping chaos but learning to arrange it into harmony. From this cosmic gardening flowed all that came next, the invention of calendars, the building of temples, the crafting of laws. For once the gods had given order to the heavens, humanity began to mirror that order on earth, writing their first codes of balance and justice. Once the black gods had woven light from darkness and stretched sky above earth, they turned their attention to the great canopy of night. For the people, the stars were not random pinpricks of fire. They were the handwriting of the gods, constellations drawn as maps of memory, instruction, and destiny. To look upward was not to gaze at cold, distant worlds, but to read divine script burning across eternity. The goddess Nut, whose body arched across the heavens, became the canvas for this celestial writing. Each star was a jewel adorning her form, each constellation a sentence written in divine language. Her body carried stories, hunters, rivers, animals, and heroes, myths inscribed in light. To know the stars was to know the gods' intent, for nothing in the sky was meaningless. The ancients organized their lives by these lights. The Orion constellation, for instance, was linked to Osiris, the god of resurrection. Its rising each year marked the flooding of the Nile, bringing fertile soil and renewal. Thus, the heavens did not simply mark time, they prophesied it. Each constellation became a clock, a teacher, a promise of cycles yet to come. The dog star, Sirius called Sopdet, was associated with Isis. Its rising in the dawn sky heralded the Nile's flood, an event upon which all life depended. When the star returned, the people rejoiced, for it meant the River Mother had remembered them. Their survival was written in her light. The bond between heaven and earth was unbreakable because the gods had bound them together. But these stars were not just tools for farming or calendars. They were also guides for the soul. The ancient Egyptians believed that after death, the soul traveled among the stars, judged by Ma'at's feather, guided by Osiris, reborn in the company of the gods. The Milky Way itself was seen as the heavenly Nile, a river of light across which the dead sailed into eternity. To live righteously was to secure one's place among the constellations, becoming a star in Nut's body, shining forever. Across Africa, this truth echoed in other traditions. In the Dogon cosmology of Mali, the star Sirius held central importance. They told of its hidden companion, a dark star invisible to the eye but present in orbit. Long before modern telescopes confirmed this, the Dogon knew it a testament to their inherited cosmic knowledge. To them, the stars were not idle mysteries but living revelations passed down by divine teachers. The people learned to read these celestial signs as guides not only for planting and navigation but for moral order. If the heavens fell into chaos, so too would the earth. If the constellations shifted, kings trembled, knowing their rule was tied to balance above. The stars taught that every human act resonated with cosmic harmony. To disturb justice was to misalign with the heavens themselves. And so, the night sky became a mirror of divine law. Every constellation reminded humanity of their place within creation. Children of the gods, bound to live in balance with the rhythms written in the stars. This celestial script was the blueprint of civilization. It would inspire not only myths but mathematics, calendars, architecture, and even the orientation of temples aligned perfectly to stellar risings. The stars were never distant. They were instruction, memory, and prophecy made visible. From these patterns of light, humanity learned not just how to survive, but how to live in harmony with eternity. And as they studied, they realized something profound. The same gods who lit the stars had also inscribed their law in the hearts of humankind. To the ancients, creation was not complete when light shone in the heavens or when stars glittered above. The cosmos needed more than order and rhythm, it needed law. Not law as humans later invented with punishments and decrees, but law as an eternal principle that ensured harmony between every element of existence. This law was embodied in Ma'at, the goddess of truth, balance, and justice. She was not merely a deity to be worshipped, but the very principle by which the universe was sustained. Ma'at was depicted with a single feather upon her head, light yet unyielding, simple yet profound. Her feather became the measure of all hearts. At death, every soul was brought before Osiris to be judged, their heart placed on one side of the scales, Ma'at's feather on the other. If the heart was heavier, burdened with lies, injustice, cruelty, it was devoured by Amit, the eater of souls. If it was balanced, the soul passed into eternity, dwelling among the stars. This was not punishment in the sense of arbitrary wrath. It was consequence, as natural as day following night. What is striking is that Ma'at's law was not confined to death. It guided life. Kings were said to live by Ma'at, ruling only so long as they upheld truth and balance. Farmers planting their fields, merchants measuring their wares, judges hearing disputes, all were accountable to her principle. To cheat in trade was not just dishonorable, it was a violation of cosmic order. To mistreat the poor was not only cruelty, it was a disruption of balance. The people believed the Nile itself would swell or shrink depending on whether Ma'at was honored. Justice was not abstract, it was inscribed in nature. The brilliance of this idea is that Ma'at united the cosmos with daily life. The stars followed their courses because of Ma'at. The sun rose each day because of Ma'at. A just society flourished because of Ma'at. Injustice was not simply wrong, it invited chaos, threatening the delicate balance of creation itself. This was the first moral law of humanity. To live in truth was to live in harmony with the universe. And unlike later doctrines that demanded blind obedience to a single god, Ma'at's principle was participatory. Every person carried responsibility for balance. Kings were not exempt, priests were not superior, and no ritual could replace right action. A peasant living honestly honored Ma'at as surely as a pharaoh building temples. The gods had not imposed tyranny but partnership, inviting humanity to be co-keepers of cosmic harmony. This law spread beyond Kemet. In Nubia, Ethiopia, and other African civilizations, principles of balance and justice were woven into custom and ritual. Even as later empires rose, the memory of Ma'at's feather lingered. It shaped the very concept of morality, that truth is light, that lies weigh down the soul, that justice is not invention but reflection of divine order. And here lies the profound continuity. The first laws of humanity were not carved on stone tablets by jealous gods, but written in the stars and embodied by Ma'at. Her wisdom taught that to live justly was not only to honor society, but to maintain the balance of the entire cosmos. From this sacred principle, civilizations learned to structure their codes, their rituals, their kingship, and in time, temples themselves would rise as embodiments of Ma'at's law, stone and shadow, aligned perfectly with the sun. Proof that architecture itself could become an act of justice. The ancients did not build their temples to impress, but to align. Every stone laid was a prayer, every corridor a reflection of the heavens, every chamber a dialogue with the gods who shaped the stars. To step into a temple was not to enter a house of worship in the later sense. It was to walk inside the architecture of the cosmos itself. The black gods who taught humanity law also taught them measure. From Ma'at's principle of balance came the idea that buildings could harmonize with the rhythms of the sky. Temples were not built randomly. They were oriented to solstices, equinoxes, and star risings. When the sun struck a sacred corridor at dawn, it was not coincidence but design, a cosmic alignment carved into stone. The gods were inscribed into the landscape, ensuring that human ritual unfolded in step with celestial order. Consider Karnak, one of the largest temple complexes ever built, its axis aligned with the rising sun at the solstice. Once a year, dawn's first light would pierce through its colossal gates, illuminating the inner sanctuary where the statue of Amun awaited. This was no mere spectacle. It was proof that the temple itself participated in creation, reaffirming the bond between earth and sky. The pyramids of Giza were no less cosmic. Their sides aligned with the cardinal points, their shafts pointed to specific stars, their proportions encoded mathematical harmony. To the ancients, these were not tombs alone but resurrection machines, stairways linking the soul of the pharaoh to Osiris and the eternal stars. Their scale was a declaration that humanity could anchor divine order in stone, preserving it against time itself. Sacred geometry underpinned all this. Circles represented eternity, triangles, balance, squares, stability. These shapes were not arbitrary but divine symbols, translating the gods' language into architecture. A temple was both physical and metaphysical, a space where offerings were given, but also where cosmic principles were embodied, teaching people that law was not only to be spoken but lived, walked, and entered. Even smaller shrines carried this alignment. Village altars faced rivers, invoking Oshun's flow. Stones placed in circles echoed the cycles of stars. Fire pits mirrored the sun's rising and setting. Every act of building was an act of memory, a way to keep the gods' order present in the rhythm of daily life. What makes this extraordinary is that the people saw no separation between architecture, astronomy, and morality. To build in alignment with the stars was an ethical act. A king who ignored Ma'at would find his temples crumbling, his monuments misaligned, his people estranged. But a ruler who honored Ma'at raised structures that endured millennia because they were grounded not only in stone but in cosmic truth. Through temples, pyramids, and shrines, the gods' order became visible and tangible. Even long after rituals ceased, their alignments still whisper of the ancient law. Their stones still catch the sun. Their shadows still mark the solstice. These structures stand as reminders that humanity once lived in rhythm with the cosmos, not in defiance of it. And from these temples, humanity learned something greater still. If stone could mirror heaven, so could society. Architecture became the bridge, showing that law was not only in the sky but also in community, justice, and kingship. To the ancients, kingship was never merely political. It was sacred stewardship. A king was not ruler by personal right, but by alignment with the black gods who had shaped the heavens. His crown was more than ornament. It was a symbol of the sun, the stars, and the first laws. His throne was not a seat of privilege, but a burden of balance, the duty to mirror Ma'at on earth. The pharaoh of Kemet was called the son of Ra, not to elevate him above humanity, but to bind him to cosmic responsibility. As Ra gave light to the world each day, the king was expected to give justice to his people. If he faltered, the land faltered. Droughts, floods, and disorder were seen not as natural accidents but as signs that the king had failed Ma'at. His success or failure rippled through creation itself. This understanding of kingship carried profound humility. The king could not invent his own law, he had to uphold the eternal law already written by the gods. His authority flowed not from conquest but from harmony. Coronation ceremonies included oaths to Ma'at, rituals invoking Isis and Osiris, sacrifices to ensure balance between heaven and earth. The king was a mediator, not a tyrant, and his legitimacy depended on his fidelity to cosmic order. Across Africa, similar patterns emerged. In Nubia, rulers were guardians of Amun's sanctuary, chosen not only for strength but for their ability to maintain balance with the gods. In Ethiopia, kings claimed descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, but their role mirrored the same truth. Rulership was measured by justice, generosity, and protection of the people. Even in West Africa, among Yoruba kingdoms, kingship was seen as a sacred trust. The Oba ruled only so long as he honored the Orishas and upheld balance in the community. In all these traditions, kingship was inseparable from ritual. Festivals marked not the ruler's vanity but his renewal of harmony with the divine. He offered sacrifices not to enrich the gods but to reaffirm his dependence on them. Priests, diviners, and sages stood beside him, reminding him that his power was conditional. Unlike later empires where kings claimed absolute dominance, African kingship was fragile. It survived only as long as it aligned with cosmic law. But kings were also human. The myths of Osiris remind us that even divine kingship was vulnerable. Osiris, betrayed and dismembered, had to be restored by Isis before his reign could continue in the underworld. This story was more than myth, it was warning. Even the most exalted ruler could fall if he forgot balance. Power without justice was chaos, and chaos invited destruction. This fragile, sacred vision of kingship influenced every part of society. Farmers saw themselves as mirrors of the king when they sowed and harvested in rhythm with the Nile. Judges saw themselves as extensions of his duty when they weighed disputes. Every person carried a piece of the king's burden, ensuring that the law of the gods was not confined to palaces but woven into daily life. Thus, kingship was never about the ruler alone. It was about the covenant between people, gods, and cosmos. When the king stood true to Ma'at, the nation thrived. Temples shone, rivers flowed, stars guided. But when he faltered, disorder crept in, and the people knew it was time for balance to be restored. And in this interplay of divine duty and human failure, the ancients discovered something deeper, that power itself is never safe in one set of hands. The gods had placed balance not only in rulers but in creation itself, ensuring that law would outlast kings. The black gods who carved order into the cosmos did not stop with the laws of balance or the duties of kings. They also gave humanity a story, a myth so profound that it wove together death and life, loss and renewal, despair and hope. It was the tale of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, the divine family whose struggle and triumph became the heartbeat of eternity itself. Osiris, Lord of fertility and justice, embodied the principle of resurrection. As king, he taught humanity agriculture, law, and worship. He was not a distant god, but one who walked with his people, ensuring abundance and fairness. Yet his very gifts stirred envy. His brother Set, embodiment of chaos and violence, plotted against him. In a moment of betrayal, Set slew Osiris, dismembering his body and scattering the pieces across the land. Chaos had struck at the heart of order, but the story did not end in despair. Isis, wife and sister of Osiris, rose as the great enchantress, the goddess of love and magic. Refusing to accept death's finality, she searched the land, gathering Osiris's scattered pieces. With her spells, her devotion, and her divine breath, she reassembled him, restoring him to life. In this act, Isis became the eternal healer, the mother who defied chaos with love and magic. She bore Horus, the child of resurrection, ensuring Osiris's lineage continued. Osiris did not return to rule among the living, but he became lord of the underworld, judge of souls, guardian of the cycle of death and rebirth. His resurrection was not temporary but eternal, a reminder that death was not the end but transformation. Each flood of the Nile, each harvest from the fields, each dawn of the sun was Osiris rising again. His story was written not only in myth but in the very rhythm of nature. Horus, the falcon-eyed son, became the avenger of his father, confronting Set in a cosmic battle of justice against chaos. His triumph secured kingship, symbolizing that every earthly ruler was a continuation of Horus, carrying the divine mandate to uphold Ma'at. The cycle was clear: Osiris as the past, Isis as the present healer, Horus as the future. Together they formed the eternal rhythm: death, rebirth, continuity. This myth carried truths deeper than story. It taught that love is stronger than betrayal, that chaos can wound but not annihilate, that death is never final. It embedded the principle of cycles into every aspect of life: the planting and reaping of crops, the waxing and waning of the moon, the rise and fall of dynasties. All mirrored Osiris's journey, Isis's magic, Horus's triumph. The myth also reminded humanity that divinity was not distant but intimate. The gods themselves experienced suffering, loss, and struggle, just as humans did. And just as Isis restored Osiris, so too could humanity restore itself when scattered by chaos. The story was not only cosmic, it was personal, a promise written into the soul of every person. From this myth, rituals were born. Priests reenacted Osiris's death and rebirth in festivals. Kings invoked Horus to legitimize their reign. Women called upon Isis for fertility, healing, and protection. The people remembered that they were part of the same eternal cycle: to live, to die, to be reborn in the embrace of the gods. The Osiris-Isis-Horus cycle became a foundation of African spirituality, echoing across millennia, even influencing later myths of saviors who die and rise again. But to the ancients, it was not a borrowed promise but the first truth, that eternity itself was born from their gods. And as humanity lived by this rhythm, they learned something deeper still: that if gods themselves could be torn apart and restored, then the same principle must govern the stars, the sun, and the very universe. Nothing is ever lost. All returns, all transforms, all continues. For the ancients, time was not a straight line marching from past to future. Time was rhythm. It was Osiris dying and rising, Ra journeying across the sky, the Nile swelling and retreating. The gods who shaped the sun and stars were not only masters of creation, they were masters of time itself, teaching humanity how to mark its flow, honor its cycles, and live in harmony with eternity. The first calendars were not etched in stone tablets by prophets, but drawn in the heavens. The rising of Sirius, Sopdet, marked the new year, heralding the flooding of the Nile. This single star became the anchor of the Egyptian calendar, a system so precise it guided harvests, festivals, and rituals for centuries. Each cycle of Sirius was seen as Isis remembering her people, a divine rhythm woven into the cosmos. Months were measured by the moon, waxing and waning in a dance with Nut's starry body. Its phases told when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest, when to honor the dead. Time was not imposed. It was read, decoded from the sky as if the gods had written it there for humanity to follow. Festivals were woven into these cycles, not arbitrary dates, but sacred alignments. The daily journey of Ra became another clock. His rising was dawn, his zenith noon, his descent dusk, his passage through the underworld night. Each stage was honored with rituals, morning prayers, midday offerings, evening chants, midnight hymns. Time was not empty hours, but sacred stations, moments charged with meaning. To miss a prayer was not merely to forget. It was to fall out of step with the rhythm of creation. Even lifetimes were understood in cycles. Birth, growth, death, and rebirth were the seasons of the soul, mirrored in the land's fertility. A child's naming echoed the dawn, adulthood the noon, old age the dusk, death the midnight, and resurrection the next dawn. Existence itself was time's great circle, never-ending, forever turning. By mastering these cycles, humanity did more than measure days. They learned to live in harmony with cosmic law. A society that sowed against the stars failed. A society that aligned with them thrived. Kings who ignored Ma'at found their reigns short. Those who honored balance endured. Time itself was proof of the gods' order, a law no one could escape, yet everyone could flow with. This mastery of time spilled into art and architecture. Temples aligned to solstices were timekeepers in stone. Pyramids oriented to stars were monuments of eternity. Obelisks cast shadows marking hours. The landscape became a living clock. The earth itself synchronized with the sky. Yet time was not a tyrant in this vision. It was not something to be feared or hoarded. It was a gift, a rhythm offered by the gods, reminding humanity that every ending is a beginning, every loss a renewal, every death a seed of rebirth. To honor time was to honor life itself. The gods taught that time was sacred memory and sacred prophecy. It preserved the past and promised the future, holding them together in eternal rhythm. And so, the ancients did not ask, "When will time end?" They asked, "How do we live within its eternal turning?" And this wisdom that time was a circle, not a prison, became the heartbeat of African civilization. It reminded them that just as Ra would rise tomorrow, so too would their people endure, so too would their gods remain, and so too would the cycles of justice return. When the black gods gave humanity the gift of time, they gave more than calendars and clocks. They gave vision. For time was not only rhythm, it was revelation. The rising of stars, the turning of moons, the floods of rivers, all were messages written by divine hands. To read these rhythms was to see not only the present but the future. Prophecy was not guesswork. It was the science of the gods, the magic of destiny encoded in cycles. In Kemet, prophecy was embodied in Thoth, the scribe of the gods, master of writing, wisdom, and time. Thoth did not invent the future. He recorded it. His hieroglyphs were not symbols of human invention, but divine truths captured in script. To consult Thoth's wisdom was to glimpse what was already written in the stars. He taught priests that the cosmos itself was a scroll, and those who could read it could guide kings, nations, and souls. Divination, then, was not superstition. It was communion with divine order. By casting lots, interpreting dreams, or reading the heavens, humanity aligned itself with the currents already flowing through creation. A dream of Osiris could foretell renewal. A shadow cast by Sirius could predict harvests. A child born under a certain constellation carried traits written before birth. Destiny was not imposed but revealed, like a melody waiting to be heard. Prophets did not stand apart from society but within it. Their visions were sought before battles, during droughts, at coronations. They reminded kings that power was fleeting, that chaos lurked when Ma'at was ignored, that the gods' order was not optional. The people trusted them because prophecy was not abstract. It was tested against floods, stars, and seasons. If the cycle aligned, the prophecy was true. Magic itself was tied to prophecy. Spells and rituals were not manipulations of chance but harmonizations with cycles. Isis's spells restored Osiris because she invoked the eternal rhythm of death and rebirth. Priests healed the sick by invoking the balance of moisture and fire, day and night. Sorcery, in the ancient sense, was not bending reality, but stepping into its flow ahead of time, pulling tomorrow into today. Even across Africa, prophecy was rooted in cycles. The Dogon of Mali read the stars to understand their place in the cosmos, knowing of Sirius's hidden companion long before telescopes. Yoruba diviners cast cowrie shells to reveal patterns reflecting destiny. In both, the belief was the same, that life was written in rhythm, and prophecy was simply the art of listening deeply to it. This connection between prophecy and destiny shaped culture profoundly. Festivals did not only honor past events, they prepared for future ones. Myths did not only explain origins, they foretold endings. A king was not only crowned for the present, he was seen as a thread in a cycle that stretched long before and long after his reign. But prophecy also carried warning. Just as cycles brought renewal, they could also bring destruction if balance was ignored. The gods gave signs, eclipses, floods, plagues, not as random punishments but as reminders that harmony had been broken. Prophecy became not only a vision of what could come, but a call to restore Ma'at before chaos consumed all. To live in this prophetic vision was to live awake. Each sunrise was not merely dawn but omen. Each dream was not fantasy but message. Each season was not repetition but revelation. Time was alive, speaking, guiding, and those who listened found themselves carried by destiny, while those who ignored it struggled against the current of eternity. Thus, prophecy was not fear of the unknown but intimacy with the God's design. It showed that the future was not chaos waiting to strike but order waiting to be recognized. To live by prophecy was to live in confidence that the God's rhythm would carry all things into their rightful place. The ancients knew that the cosmos was not a static perfection but a living balance, forever maintained through struggle. Prophecy warned that cycles could falter, and myths reminded humanity that harmony was never guaranteed. The black gods themselves bore witness to this eternal truth that order must constantly contend with chaos, that light must rise against shadow, that creation is not a finished act but an ongoing battle. One of the most powerful myths of this struggle was the daily journey of Ra. Each dawn, Ra emerged from the horizon in his solar bark, sailing across the sky, bringing light to gods and humans alike. But as evening fell, he descended into the underworld, where he faced his greatest enemy, Apophis, the serpent of chaos. Apophis sought to devour the sun, to plunge the world into endless night. Each night, Ra battled the serpent with the help of other gods, emerging victorious at dawn. Yet, the battle was never once for all. It returned every night, a reminder that chaos was always near, always pressing against order. This myth carried profound lessons. It told the people that darkness was not simply absence of light but an active force, a current of disorder that must be resisted. It showed them that even the gods could not erase chaos, they could only hold it at bay through vigilance, courage, and balance. And by extension, humanity too had to battle chaos daily in their lives, communities, and nations. The story of Set and Horus echoed the same truth. Set, who had murdered Osiris, embodied violence, greed, and tyranny. Horus, son of Osiris and Isis, stood for justice, renewal, and rightful kingship. Their battles stretched across myth and time, raging in courts of the gods and in the deserts of the earth. Neither victory nor defeat was final. Their conflict symbolized the eternal tension between disruption and balance. Each king was seen as Horus continuing the fight, every reign a renewal of the divine struggle against chaos. Chaos, however, was not demonized in the simplistic sense. The ancients understood that without chaos, creation could not have emerged. None, the primeval waters, had birthed Atum. Set's violence, destructive though it was, revealed the resilience of Isis's love and Horus's justice. Apophis, though endlessly defeated, reminded humanity of the fragility of order and the need for constant vigilance. In this way, chaos was paradoxical, feared, resisted, yet acknowledged as the raw potential from which balance emerged. For humans, these myths were not distant stories, they were mirrors of life itself. A family torn by betrayal saw Osiris and Set. A widow rebuilding her home saw Isis gathering her husband's fragments. A child rising to avenge injustice saw Horus confronting Set. A farmer watching the sun rise after a storm saw Ra victorious over Apophis. Myth was not metaphor. It was reality expressed in divine language. Rituals reenacted these battles. Priests pierced effigies of Apophis with knives, symbolically slaying the serpent each night to ensure dawn would come. Festivals dramatized Horus's triumphs, reaffirming the king's legitimacy as defender of order. Songs praised Ra's courage, reminding people that light always rises, no matter how deep the night. In these myths of struggle, humanity found both warning and hope. Chaos could never be destroyed, but neither could it destroy creation. The gods had ensured that order would always return, that the sun would always rise, that justice would always find a way to prevail. And so, the eternal battle became the rhythm of faith itself. To live aligned with the gods was to stand on the side of light, to resist the serpent of chaos each day with truth, balance, and courage. When the ancients told of Ra's nightly battle with Apophis or Horus's endless struggle against Set, they were not recounting idle tales. These myths were blueprints, guiding humanity on how to live. If the gods themselves labored daily to keep chaos at bay, how much more must humanity do the same? Ethics, the rules of conduct, the codes of justice, the fabric of society were born not from abstract philosophy, but from the living drama of the gods. At the center of this ethic was Ma'at. Her feather weighed every action, her principle judged every choice. Just as Ra had to confront Apophis each night, so too did every human confront moments of temptation, dishonesty, or cruelty. To live by Ma'at was to ensure that one's heart remained light, free from the burdens of chaos. To betray Ma'at was to invite Apophis into one's life, letting disorder coil within the soul. The myth of Osiris and Set carried a similar lesson. Just as Set murdered his brother out of envy and greed, so too could societies tear themselves apart through jealousy, corruption, and violence. And just as Isis restored Osiris with love and devotion, so too could communities restore harmony through compassion, loyalty, and justice. Each myth became a mirror, showing the consequences of imbalance and the rewards of harmony. For rulers, these stories were more than inspiration. They were obligations. A king who ruled with justice was seen as Horus triumphant. A tyrant who oppressed the people resembled Set, bringing droughts, famine, and revolt. Priests and prophets reminded rulers constantly, "Your throne is secure only so long as you uphold Ma'at." Power divorced from justice was illegitimate. For ordinary people, the gods' struggles translated into everyday practice. Farmers learned patience from the cycles of Osiris, trusting that after every death came rebirth. Merchants learned honesty from Ma'at, knowing that false measures would weigh down their souls. Families learned loyalty from Isis, whose devotion to Osiris restored what seemed lost forever. To live ethically was not optional. It was participation in the cosmic order itself. What made this ethic profound was that it was universal. Every human was judged, not just kings or priests. Every heart faced the scales. Every act rippled into the cosmos. The ancients rejected the idea that divine favor could be bought with sacrifice alone. Offerings mattered, but without truth and justice, they were hollow. The gods demanded not ritual perfection but moral alignment. Even outside Kemet, this principle echoed. In Yoruba traditions, The Orishas rewarded those who honored balance and punished those who upset it. In Nubia, Ethiopia, and beyond, rulers were remembered not by wealth alone but by their justice. Across Africa, the lesson was the same. Chaos waits at the edges, and only vigilance, compassion, and truth keep it at bay. This ethical vision was not a prison but a liberation. It meant that no one was helpless before chaos. Every act of kindness, every honest trade, every just judgment contributed to the gods' eternal battle. Humanity was not passive. It was enlisted, empowered, invited to stand alongside Ra, Isis, and Horus in defending order against shadow. In this way, myth became morality, and morality became survival. To live ethically was not merely to please the gods. It was to ensure that dawn came again, that harvests returned, that rivers flowed, that souls endured. Ethics was not law imposed from above, it was harmony woven into existence. And from this foundation, humanity began to codify these truths into traditions, rituals, and wisdom literature teachings meant to carry the gods' law into future generations. The ancients understood that memory fades. Without ritual, even the most profound truths slip from human grasp. That is why the black gods did not leave their wisdom only in stars and myths. They wove it into ceremonies, festivals, and sacred texts. These rituals and teachings were not empty traditions but living bridges between human life and cosmic law. Festivals mirrored the cycles of creation. The Osiris Mysteries, for instance, were annual dramas reenacting the god's death, dismemberment, and resurrection. Priests carried sacred effigies through cities, symbolizing Osiris's body, while the people mourned his loss and celebrated his return. These ceremonies were not theater but participation, a chance for every man, woman, and child to relive the truth that death leads to renewal, that chaos cannot triumph over balance. The rites of Ra marked dawn and dusk. At sunrise, hymns praised his victory over Apophis, offering gratitude for light's return. At sunset, offerings were made to guide him safely through the underworld's dangers. Even children grew up knowing that each day was a cosmic battle, and their prayers were part of the victory. In these rituals, daily time itself became sacred drama, ensuring that the people lived in rhythm with the gods. Festivals of fertility and harvest celebrated Isis and Hathor, goddesses of love, abundance, and joy. Music, dance, and feasting filled the land, reminding the people that pleasure was not sinful but sacred. To laugh, to love, to embrace the body's gifts, these were acts of devotion, honoring the gods who gave sweetness to life. In this, the ancients defied later empires that equated holiness with austerity. For them, joy was prayer, and ritual was celebration. Ritual extended even to death. Funerary rites were among the most elaborate, for they ensured that the soul aligned with Ma'at and journeyed safely to Osiris. The Book of the Dead, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day, contained spells, hymns, and instructions for the deceased. These texts were not superstition but manuals of cosmic law, ensuring that the soul remembered what the living often forgot. Truth weighs less than lies, compassion outweighs cruelty, and no spell can substitute for justice. Beyond ritual, wisdom literature flourished. Texts like the Instruction of Ptahhotep taught humility, honesty, and kindness. Centuries before the Hebrew Proverbs echoed similar lessons. Do not be arrogant because of your knowledge, Ptahhotep advised, but consult the ignorant as with the wise, for no one has reached perfection in wisdom. Such teachings show that African sages understood morality not as divine decree but as lived practice, rooted in Ma'at. Ritual and wisdom together ensured that cosmic truths became generational memory. A farmer plowing his field remembered Osiris. A child learning to speak recited hymns to Ra. A king enthroned renewed his oath to Ma'at. Every aspect of life became infused with reminders of cosmic balance, so that no one could claim ignorance. Even as centuries passed and empires shifted, These rituals and texts carried resilience. They whispered to descendants, teaching them that the gods' order could not be erased by conquest. The ceremonies were not only memory, they were resistance, subtle defiance against forces that sought to silence the truth. Through ritual, the people embodied the gods' stories. Through wisdom, they preserved the gods' principles. Together, they ensured that even when power shifted, the cosmic law remained alive, pulsing in daily rhythms, waiting for those who listened. And it was through these practices that magic itself began to emerge, not as trickery, but as the gods' wisdom applied, the art of aligning with cycles, invoking harmony, and shaping destiny. To the ancients, magic was not trickery, illusion, or rebellion against the divine. Magic, known in Kemet as Heka, was the breath of creation itself, the power the gods used to shape the cosmos. It was not apart from religion. It was religion, the engine by which prayers became reality, rituals became renewal, and words became worlds. If Maat was the law that sustained harmony, Heka was the force that made harmony possible. The black gods did not hoard this power for themselves. They taught humanity how to wield it responsibly, how to speak with authority, and how to act in alignment with the cosmic order. Every spell, every chant, every gesture was understood as an echo of the gods' first creation, a way to channel the same energy that separated sky from earth, light from darkness. At the heart of this sacred magic was Isis, known as the mistress of Heka. She embodied love, healing, and protection, but also cunning and power. With her words, she restored Osiris from death. With her breath, she gave life to Horus. She showed that magic was not violence but restoration, not domination but healing. For women and men alike, Isis became the model of sacred power to speak truth, to protect family, to bend chaos back into harmony. Thoth, scribe of the gods, was another master of magic. He gave humanity writing, turning speech into permanent spell, hieroglyphs into vessels of power. To carve a symbol was to channel divine energy. To recite a hymn was to invoke cosmic law. In his wisdom, Thoth reminded humanity that words were never empty. Every syllable resonated with eternity. To lie was to twist harmony. To speak truth was to strengthen creation. But magic was not only for priests and kings. Everyday life pulsed with it. Mothers whispered protective charms over their children. Farmers poured libations into soil before planting. Healers mixed herbs with incantations. These were not superstitions but sacred technologies, ways to align human life with divine rhythm. Each act of Heka acknowledged that the world was alive, filled with spirit, and responsive to intention. Magic also bridged humanity and the unseen. Divination revealed patterns of destiny. Amulets carried protective force. Dream interpretation unveiled the gods' whispers. None of this was considered rebellion against the divine, it was communion. Just as Ra faced Apophis each night, humans used magic to face the chaos in their own lives. Illness, conflict, despair. Magic was their weapon and shield, given not by fear but by love. In truth, the line between religion and magic did not exist. To pray was to cast a spell. To sacrifice was to realign energy. To sing was to heal the body and call the gods. Magic was woven into ritual, ethics, architecture, even art. The ancients knew that creation itself was a spell. The first word spoken by Atum was the first incantation, the beginning of everything. This understanding shaped civilization. It meant that humans were not passive beneath the gods, but partners in sustaining order. They could heal, protect, and restore not by begging but by aligning with the cosmic forces the gods had already placed within reach. Power was shared, not monopolized, and responsibility was heavy, for misuse of Heka invited imbalance. Over time, this sacred knowledge spread across Africa and beyond. In Yoruba traditions, the Orishas taught similar practices, invoking Ogun for strength, Oshun for love, Shengo for justice. In Ethiopia and Nubia, Chants and amulets carried the same logic. Words and symbols could shift reality. Across the continent, the truth echoed. Magic was not sin but survival, not rebellion but remembrance. And yet, this sacred inheritance would one day be branded dangerous, outlawed, and erased by empires that feared the people's autonomy. For now, though, in the age of the gods, Heka was celebrated, embraced, and practiced as humanity's most direct link to divine creation. For countless generations, Heka was the lifeblood of civilization. It guided harvests, healed the sick, protected children, and ensured that kings ruled in harmony with Ma'at. But power, even sacred power, invites envy. As empires shifted and new theologies arose, the magic given by the black gods came to be seen not as blessing but as threat. What had once been the birthright of humanity became the target of suppression. The first signs were subtle. Kings who drifted from Ma'at began to use ritual for control rather than harmony. Instead of serving as mediators between gods and people, they claimed magic as their private possession, accessible only through sanctioned priests. Ordinary charms whispered by mothers or healers were dismissed as lesser. Heka, once universal, was fenced off, transformed from shared inheritance into guarded monopoly. As foreign influences crept into Africa, the suppression deepened. Invading powers saw the gods of Egypt and Nubia not as teachers but as rivals. Where Isis had once been revered as the mother of magic, she was reframed as sorceress. Where Thoth had given wisdom, his hieroglyphs were called superstition. The same rituals that had aligned humanity with the cosmos were painted as dangerous, rebellious, or demonic. The most insidious tactic was redefinition. Magic was severed from its roots in cosmic law and cast as deception. Healing chants were labeled curses. Divination became taboo. Amulets and charms, once symbols of protection, were condemned as idolatry. By twisting perception, rising empires stripped people of their confidence in their own sacred tools, leaving them dependent on new authorities for spiritual direction. This suppression was not accidental, it was political. Magic empowered ordinary people. A healer with Isis's blessings could restore the sick without priest or temple. A farmer invoking Osiris could ensure fertility without kingly decree. A diviner reading the stars could guide a community without ruler's approval. Such autonomy threatened empires built on hierarchy and control. To weaken the people, their sacred inheritance had to be demonized. Across Africa, resistance persisted. Mothers still whispered charms. Elders still poured libations. Communities still danced for Oshun, Shango, and Ogun. But they did so increasingly in secret, hiding practices that once flourished openly. What was survival for them became heresy to new powers. Each ritual carried risk, yet each ritual also carried defiance, a refusal to let memory die. The suppression was not only external. As new faiths emerged, some Africans themselves turned against their heritage, convinced by foreign doctrines that their gods were false, their practices evil. This internalized erasure cut even deeper, for it taught children to fear what their ancestors had loved. Where once a drumbeat invoked divine joy, now it was silenced as sinful. Where once the stars were read as prophecy, now they were ignored as forbidden. And yet, even under pressure, magic endured. The gods' presence could not be erased by decree or doctrine. Ra still rose each morning. The Nile still flooded in rhythm with Sirius. Dreams still carried prophecy. Bodies still remembered healing songs. The cosmos itself refused suppression, whispering constantly that harmony belonged to all. But the era of open Heka was waning. A new order was rising, one that sought to centralize power in the hands of jealous gods and fearful rulers. The time of shared magic was being buried, its wisdom hidden, not lost, but waiting. When the suppression of sacred power began, it was not enough for rising empires to silence rituals or banish charms. To truly erase the black gods, Their very stories had to be rewritten. Memory itself became the battlefield. Myths that once sustained civilizations were retold with new heroes, new laws, and new gods often stripped of their African origin, reshaped to fit foreign agendas. The process was deliberate. Conquerors and priests understood that people draw strength from their past. If Osiris still rose each year in story, then his people could never be broken. If Isis was still invoked as healer, then mothers would never forget their power. To weaken a civilization, one had to sever its memory. And so, erasure became the most potent weapon. Sacred texts were hidden, destroyed, or reinterpreted. The Book of Coming Forth by Day was branded as sorcery, its spells of protection and guidance dismissed as superstition. The wisdom of Ptahhotep, once recited as moral instruction, was ignored, while later traditions copied its proverbs into their own scriptures without attribution. Even the principles of Ma'at, truth, justice, balance were absorbed, but stripped of her name, leaving only abstract law where once there had been divine presence. The gods themselves were recast. Osiris's death and resurrection became echoed in foreign savior myths, but his name was silenced. Isis, who restored life with her magic, was merged into later images of the Divine Mother, yet her African roots were obscured. Horus, the falcon child of resurrection, was mirrored in stories of future messiahs, yet his falcon eyes were hidden under new symbols. In each case, the essence endured, but the origin was denied. This rewriting was not innocent blending. It was conquest of the imagination. By retaining the power of the stories but erasing their black gods, empires ensured that generations would inherit wisdom divorced from its source. People were taught to honor the principles but forget the names, to practice the rituals without remembering the hands that first gave them. Temples that once honored Amun, Ra, and Hathor were converted, destroyed, or rebranded. Their stones still aligned with solstices, their corridors still caught the sun, but their purpose was recast. The architecture whispered truth, but the official story declared otherwise. Memory itself was at war with propaganda, yet beneath this rewriting, fragments survived. In oral traditions, elders carried myths unchanged. In hidden shrines, priests whispered the true names of gods. In the symbols carved on walls, truth resisted erasure. Even when the gods' stories were rewritten, they were never wholly erased. The Nile still rose, Sirius still shone, the sun still followed Ra's path. Creation itself refused to forget. This deliberate rewriting reveals something profound. The gods were never displaced because they were weak, but because they were powerful. Their stories carried truths so enduring that even empires needed to steal them. Their magic was so unbreakable that it had to be disguised rather than destroyed. And in this recognition lies a paradox. Even in their erasure, the black gods shaped the future. Their myths, transformed and disguised, seeded new religions, new rituals, new visions of law and resurrection. Humanity carried their wisdom unknowingly, living by truths whose origin had been silenced but never lost. The rewriting of history was brutal, but it could not undo eternity. For every time the sun rose, for every time the stars aligned, the cosmos itself retold the original story whether empires allowed it or not. Though temples were toppled and myths rewritten, the gods were never truly gone. Their names lingered in whispers, their symbols etched into stone too deep to erase, their rituals carried in secret from one generation to the next. What empires sought to bury, the people preserved in shadows, keeping alive the memory of the black gods who had shaped the sun, the stars, and the rhythm of time itself. Oral tradition became the sanctuary of truth. Elders told stories by firelight, recounting how Isis gathered Osiris's fragments, how Horus battled Set, how Ra rose each morning against Apophis. These tales were no longer state ceremonies but personal inheritances, passed from grandmother to child, from teacher to student. They carried not only history but identity. reminders that even if rulers denied the gods, their people would not. Symbols, too, resisted erasure. The Ankh, sign of life, appeared carved on walls, painted on amulets, woven into jewelry. To wear it was to proclaim continuity with eternity, even if new authorities forbade its meaning. The feather of Mot, the eye of Horus, the scarab of rebirth, these images became subtle acts of resistance, codes that declared allegiance to the ancient order. The people lived surrounded by reminders that balance and truth could not be silenced. Rituals persisted in disguise. A libation poured to a foreign saint was still a libation to Isis. A festival rebranded under new names still honored the cycles of Osiris. Songs sung in marketplaces carried hidden verses, praising gods whose temples had been torn down. Even the act of looking to the stars at night, tracing familiar constellations, became an act of devotion, a quiet remembering of the divine script written across the heavens. African traditions beyond Kemet carried this memory in their own forms. In Yoruba lands, the Orishas embodied truths that echoed Isis, Osiris, and Ra. In Dogon cosmology, the secrets of Sirius lived on, preserved in ritual long after other cultures forgot. In Nubia and Kush, ancient sanctuaries remained, hidden in deserts, still aligned to the rising sun. Memory was not centralized, it was dispersed, carried in many hands, harder to extinguish because it lived everywhere. What is remarkable is how these hidden traditions transformed survival into strength. By existing outside official sanction, they became more intimate, more deeply woven into daily life. A mother whispering a charm was as much priestess as any temple initiate. A farmer planting by the stars was as much astronomer as any court sage. Spiritual authority returned to the people, no longer monopolized by kings or empires. The survival of these memories shows that truth is not dependent on monuments or official texts. Temples can fall, scrolls can burn, but living memory endures in the breath, the word, the ritual. The gods did not vanish, they shifted, hiding within the very people who loved them. Even in forced silence, the gods' presence pulsed beneath the surface, and when the time came, those memories would rise again, shaping new movements of resistance, new awakenings, new visions of freedom. For in the shadows, the people preserved not only the names of their gods, but the certainty that balance would return, and that certainty would become the seed of revival. History teaches us that nothing sacred ever stays buried forever. The black gods, whose names had been suppressed and whose stories rewritten, did not remain in silence. Their memory, preserved in shadows, began to resurface first in subtle ways, then in bold revivals that reconnected people with their origins. What was once hidden in whispers became songs of freedom, chants of defiance, and affirmations of identity. The revival did not come from palaces or institutions, but from the ground up. Farmers, healers, drummers, and storytellers carried fragments of divine memory until the time was right. When oppressive empires weakened, the fragments emerged again, pieced together like Osiris's body by Isis. Just as the goddess had reassembled her beloved, so too did communities reassemble their sacred inheritance. Music played a central role in this revival. The drum, once silenced, returned as heartbeat of ritual. Its rhythm recalled Ra's daily journey and Osiris's eternal cycle. Dancing circles once again mirrored the heavens, each step invoking the turning of stars. Songs carried praises to gods whose names had been disguised for centuries. With every note, people remembered not in dusty archives, but in living flesh. The stars, too, called memory back. As people continued to look upward, constellations whispered the old stories. Orion still shone as Osiris, Sirius still heralded Isis, and the Milky Way still traced the heavenly Nile. No empire could erase the cosmos, and so the sky itself became scripture for revival. Elders reminded children that the gods had written their promises in light, and that light could never be erased. The revival was not only spiritual but political. To remember the black gods was to reclaim identity. If Isis had restored Osiris, then so too could communities restore themselves after conquest. If Horus had triumphed over Set, then so too could oppressed peoples triumph over tyrants. Myth once again became mirror. Ancient stories gave courage to modern struggles. Freedom movements across Africa and the diaspora drew strength from ancestral memory, even when they did not name it directly. This return also challenged narratives that had dominated for centuries. Where foreign doctrines had insisted that magic was sin, the revival declared it survival. Where official histories had denied Africa's role in shaping civilization, the revival uncovered pyramids, texts, and traditions that told otherwise. Each discovery of forgotten heritage was a spark, igniting pride and breaking chains of imposed inferiority. In this revival, the gods themselves were not distant figures of the past, but living presences. Isis was seen in mothers who endured against all odds. Horus was seen in youth, rising to confront injustice. Ra was seen in every dawn that promised renewal. The gods were alive, not in temples of stone, but in human resilience, memory, and courage. This resurgence was not uniform. It took many forms, shaped by cultures and contexts. In some places, it appeared as conscious return to ancestral rituals. In others, it emerged through art, music, and literature, echoing ancient themes. In still others, it appeared as whispered prayers, quiet defiance against systems that still feared the old god's power. Yet in every case, the pattern was clear. What had been suppressed was stirring again. The return of the forgotten gods revealed the ultimate truth, that memory is eternal. Suppression may last centuries, but cycles always turn. Just as Ra rises each dawn, so too do the gods rise in human consciousness, reminding people that their roots are deep, their story unbroken, their power undeniable. And with this return came a new realization that the black gods had never been lost at all. They had always been here, waiting in the rhythm of drums, the whisper of rivers, the light of stars, and the beating of human hearts. The story of the black gods is not confined to dusty ruins or forgotten temples. It is not merely myth, nor only history. Their presence is woven into the very structure of existence, the rising of the sun, the shining of the stars, the cycles of life and death. To speak of them is not to look backward, but to acknowledge what has always been and what will always remain. When Ra crosses the sky each morning, he repeats his victory over Apophis, promising that light will always return. When the Nile floods, it renews the land in Osiris's rhythm, reminding humanity that from death comes life. When Sirius rises, Isis calls her people again, whispering that abundance and healing are never lost. The heavens are not silent, they speak with the voices of the gods. Every dawn, every season, every star, their legacy also lives in humanity. The compassion of Isis survives in mothers who restore what has been broken. The justice of Horus breathes in leaders who resist tyranny. The wisdom of Thoth speaks in every teacher, every scribe, every seeker of truth. The principle of Ma'at shines whenever truth is spoken, whenever balance is restored, whenever justice is done. Humanity itself is the temple in which the gods now dwell, a living continuation of the cosmic order. Even in modern times, their echoes shape culture, art, and spirit. The pyramids stand as silent sermons in stone, still aligned to the stars. Ancient texts resurface, revealing that wisdom suppressed for millennia is still alive. Oral traditions endure, songs still invoke divine rhythms, and rituals once hidden in shadows now find new voice. The gods' legacy cannot be erased because it is inscribed not only in memory but in the universe itself. This truth carries a challenge. To honor the gods is not merely to remember their names, but to live their principles. To uphold Ma'at is to seek justice in a world too often tilted toward chaos. To invoke Isis is to heal, to restore, to protect. To walk with Ra is to rise each day with courage, pushing back darkness with light. The gods call not for passive worship but for active participation in sustaining balance. Their story also carries hope. Just as Isis restored Osiris, so too can fractured communities be restored. Just as Horus triumphed over Set, so too can justice triumph over oppression. Just as Ra emerges from night, so too can light emerge from any darkness. The cycles of the gods are not distant myths, but living promises, patterns that guide humanity toward resilience and renewal. In the end, the black gods remind us of something profound, that eternity is not far away but present, that creation is not finished but ongoing, that time is not a march to ending but a rhythm without conclusion. They shaped the sun, the stars, and the beginning of time, and their imprint remains in every heartbeat, every dawn, every constellation. Their names may have been silenced by empires, but their truth cannot be buried. For as long as the sun rises and stars burn, their story continues. To remember them is not to reach backward, but to awaken to the eternal, to step into the rhythm they began, to carry forward the balance they entrusted, to live as reflections of the gods who first taught humanity what it meant to be alive. And so the circle closes, yet also opens. The gods remain with us, not as relics, but as rhythm, not as myth, but as truth. The sun shines because they willed it. The stars burn because they kindled them. And time itself turns because they set it in motion. The black gods are eternal, and in remembering them, so too are we.